In the summer of 1969, at the very end of a decade that had been defined by the ideals of peace and love, a series of brutal, bizarre, and seemingly random murders terrified the city of Los Angeles and sent a shockwave of fear across America. On a quiet August night, 5 people were savagely killed at a home in the wealthy Benedict Canyon neighborhood, among them the heavily pregnant actress Sharon Tate. The next night, a wealthy couple, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, were murdered in their home in a similar ritualistic fashion. The crime scenes were a chaotic mystery. There was no clear motive. Nothing of significant value was stolen. The victims seemed to have nothing in common. It was a crime that seemed to defy all logic, a nightmare that had descended upon the city without warning. Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter is the definitive inside story of the hunt for the killers and the sensational trial that followed, written by the prosecutor who built the case and put them away. But this book is more than just one of the best-selling true crime books of all time. It is a deep, philosophical dive into the mind of a master manipulator, a chilling case study in the psychology of cults, and a terrifying look at how a group of ordinary young people from good homes could be programmed to commit acts of extraordinary and unspeakable evil. This is the story of Charles Manson and his family. To understand the cultural impact of these crimes, you have to understand the moment in which they occurred. August 1969 was the apex of the counterculture movement. It was the summer of Woodstock, a time of immense social change and youthful optimism. The murders on Cielo Drive were like a razor blade slashing through that dream. The scene that the police discovered on the morning of August 9th was one of almost unimaginable horror. Inside and outside the secluded home of actress Sharon Tate and her husband, the director Roman Polanski, lay 5 bodies. Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant, had been brutally stabbed. So had her friends, the celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, the coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Folger's boyfriend Wojciech Frykowski. A young man named Stephen Parent, who was just visiting the property's caretaker, had been shot and killed in his car. The word "pig" was scrawled in blood on the front door. The Los Angeles Police Department was completely baffled. The sheer brutality and randomness of the crime were unlike anything they had ever seen. Was it a drug deal gone wrong? A ritualistic killing? A targeted assassination? There were no clear leads, and a wave of panic swept through the wealthy and famous circles of Hollywood. The very next night, the killers struck again. Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a successful grocery store executive, and his wife, were murdered in their home in a similar savage fashion. This time, the killers wrote "Death to Pigs" and "Helter Skelter Sick" on the walls and refrigerator in their victims' blood. The city was on edge. The 2 crimes seemed connected by their sheer brutality, but the victims had no apparent link to each other. The police investigation was fumbled from the start. Different police departments failed to share information. Crucial clues were overlooked. For weeks the case went nowhere, and the killers remained ghosts, a terrifying and unknown force that had shattered the city's sense of security. The prophet of the desert. The answer to the mystery was not in the glamorous world of Hollywood, but in the desolate, dusty landscape of the California desert, at a rundown old movie set called Spahn Ranch. This was the home of The Family, a ragtag group of young, mostly female runaways and societal dropouts. And at the center of this group, the sun around which they all orbited, was their charismatic, messianic, and deeply disturbed leader, a 34-year-old ex-convict and failed musician named Charles Manson. To understand how the Tate-LaBianca murders could have happened, you must first understand the man who orchestrated them. Charles Manson was not an imposing physical figure. He was short, with a wild, intense stare, but he possessed an almost supernatural gift for manipulation. He was a product of the American prison system, having spent more than half of his life behind bars. In prison, he hadn't just learned to be a criminal. He had studied the art of controlling people. When he was released from prison in 1967, he walked out into the perfect storm, the summer of love in San Francisco. He found a generation of lost and searching young people who had rejected their parents' middle-class values but hadn't found anything to replace them with. They were looking for a guru, for a father figure, for someone to give them a sense of meaning and belonging. And Charlie was more than happy to play that role. He gathered a following, mostly young women, and brought them to Spahn Ranch. There, he created a completely isolated, self-contained world, a cult, with himself at the absolute center. He controlled every aspect of their lives. He used a powerful and destructive cocktail of tools to break down their individual identities and remake them in his own image. He used LSD and other psychedelic drugs to shatter their egos and make them more suggestible. He used sex, promoting a doctrine of free love that in reality meant he had sexual control over all the women in the group. And he used his own strange rambling philosophy, a mishmash of Beatles lyrics, Scientology, and passages from the Book of Revelation, to create a new reality for them, a reality in which he was a Christ-like figure, and they were his chosen people. He was, in short, programming them. Every cult needs a doomsday prophecy, a grand narrative that gives meaning to their isolation and justifies their actions. And Charles Manson found his in the most unlikely of places, the Beatles' 1968 masterpiece, The White Album. Manson was obsessed with the album. He listened to it endlessly, and in its strange, eclectic, and often ambiguous lyrics, he believed he had found a secret prophetic message. He believed the Beatles were speaking directly to him, telling him about a coming apocalyptic race war. He called this war Helter Skelter, after the chaotic and noisy song on the album. His prophecy was bizarre and terrifyingly specific. He believed that black people would soon rise up and begin murdering wealthy white people in their homes. This would ignite a brutal race war that would tear America apart. While this war was raging, Manson and his chosen family would retreat to a secret underground city in the Death Valley desert, a bottomless pit, where they would wait out the apocalypse. After the war was over and the black community, unable to govern, had destroyed themselves, he and his family would emerge from the pit to rule the world. There was only one problem: the race war wasn't starting on its own, so Manson decided he had to show Blackie how to do it. He believed that by committing a series of brutal, ritualistic murders in the homes of wealthy white people, and by leaving clues designed to frame black political groups like the Black Panthers, like writing "pig" on the walls, he could be the spark that would ignite the Helter Skelter apocalypse. This was the motive. It was not money, it was not revenge. It was a motive born from a completely delusional, insane, and racist fantasy, a fantasy that he had successfully implanted in the minds of his young, impressionable followers. They believed in Helter Skelter as a matter of absolute religious faith, and they were willing to kill and to die for it. The break in the case came not from brilliant detective work, but from a jailhouse confession. One of Manson's followers, a woman named Susan Atkins, was arrested on an unrelated charge. While in jail, she began bragging to her cellmates about her involvement in the Tate murders, telling them the entire gruesome story in lurid detail. One of those cellmates, horrified, went to the police. Suddenly, the investigators had their first real lead. The story of the strange hippie cult living out at Spahn Ranch began to come into focus. The investigation unraveled quickly from there. Another family member, under pressure, confirmed the story. The police finally had their suspects: Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were arrested and charged with the murders. The trial that followed was one of the longest, most expensive, and most bizarre in American legal history, and it is all documented from the inside by the lead prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi. The book gives us a front-row seat to the courtroom drama. We see Manson's hypnotic and terrifying power over his followers, even from the defendant's table. At one point he carves an X into his forehead, and the next day, the female defendants, in an act of solidarity, all appear in court with X's carved into their foreheads. They shave their heads, they sing Manson songs, they show absolutely no remorse, giggling and making faces during the most horrific testimony. Bugliosi faced a monumental challenge. He had to prove to a jury that Charles Manson, a man who had not physically been present at either of the crime scenes, was legally guilty of first-degree murder. His case rested on proving the bizarre and almost unbelievable motive of Helter Skelter. He had to convince a jury that this charismatic leader had so completely brainwashed his followers that when they plunged the knives into their victims, they were acting as little more than human robots, carrying out the direct will and intention of their master. Through a mountain of evidence and the crucial testimony of a former family member named Linda Kasabian, who had been present at the murders but had not participated, Bugliosi methodically and brilliantly built his case. In the end, the jury was convinced. Manson and his co-defendants were found guilty and sentenced to death, a sentence that was later commuted to life in prison. A philosophical autopsy of belief. Helter Skelter is more than the story of a crime. It is a deep and disturbing look at the dark side of human nature. it forces us to ask a series of profound and uncomfortable philosophical questions. How could this have happened? How could a group of seemingly normal young people from decent, middle-class homes be transformed into remorseless killers? The book is a powerful case study in the psychology of manipulation and the mechanisms of cult-like control. Manson was a master at exploiting the universal human need for meaning, for community, and for a sense of purpose. His followers were not evil, they were lost. They were the casualties of a generation that had rejected the values of its parents, but had found nothing solid to replace them with. Manson offered them an alternative reality, a world where they were the special, chosen few, and he was their god. He used a classic cult leader's toolkit. He isolated his followers from the outside world, cutting them off from their families and any dissenting voices. He broke down their individual egos through the use of drugs, sleep deprivation, and constant psychological manipulation. He created a powerful in-group identity, a family that demanded absolute loyalty. And he gave them a powerful, all-encompassing belief system, the Helter Skelter prophecy, that explained everything and justified anything. The story of the Manson family is a terrifying reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the seductive danger of surrendering your critical thinking to a charismatic leader who promises you all the answers. It is a permanent and vital warning. It shows us that the forces of chaos, irrationality, and manipulation are not just something we read about in history books, they are a potent and ever-present danger, a darkness that can emerge in any society at any time when people are lost and looking for a savior. It is a deep, dark inquiry into the nature of belief and the anatomy of a nightmare. If you believe we must study the darkness to understand the light, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe and let's continue the inquiry.